Welcome, everybody. We are here with Rasheera Dopson, author of Beauty with a Twist and Different Like Me. And this is part of our author series slash book reading series. So, welcome, Rasheera. How are you doing today?
Hello, everyone. I'm doing great.
For our audience who is not familiar, could you kind of give some background information about yourself and your background, and just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Like my name is Rasheera Dopson, and I wear a lot of different hats. I tend to tell people I do a lot in multimedia content engagement. I'm the founder and the host of the Womanhood and Disability podcast, in which we have dialogue and conversations with women from all different backgrounds and ethnicities and disabilities who share their experiences about living with disabilities and the intersection of what it's like to just be a woman living with a disability. I found that there are some experiences that are unique to us and us alone.
Mhm.
Um, I'm also a full-time PhD student, so that takes up a lot of my time. My research focuses again on women with disabilities and how to advance communities of color and resolving health disparities and inequities in underserved populations and community groups. Um, I do some advocacy now, although I feel like I don't really do as much advocacy, or
Mhm.
maybe I do, it's just in a different form. But between podcasting, being a research student, advocacy, I'm also a published author. I published my second book toward the end of last year, Different Like Me, which is a cute little children's book that I've always wanted to do. And so, yeah, I wear different hats, but depending on where I'm at in life and what's going on during that particular time, it kind of depends on which hat I'm going to be wearing. So today I'll be wearing the hat as fellow author, which is really excited because I don't get a lot of opportunities to talk about my books, so um, these are things that are really precious to me, and that I love sharing with other people.
Yeah, thank you for sharing a little bit about yourself, and you definitely wear a lot of hats. Before we jump into the books, I just wanted to ask you about your podcast. I guess what made you decide to start a podcast, and when did you start it? And for anyone that's interested, where can they listen to your podcast as well?
Yeah, so my podcast can be found on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, mostly all the pretty well-known public platforms for podcasts, you can find it. And then my inspiration behind starting my podcast is I was really wanting to look for stories about women with disabilities and their experiences because I had a lot of questions as a woman with a disability, and I was like, no one's having this conversation. And so I've always kind of been the person that if I don't see it, I'm going to create it. Toni Morrison, who is one of my favorite authors, she has a quote that says, if you have read a book that hasn't been written, then you are to be the one to write that book. And so I kind of feel the same way with podcasting or really anything that we do in life. If there's a story yet that you're looking to write, you have to take the responsibility of writing that story. And so I took the responsibility of creating a podcast and a platform for women with disabilities from all backgrounds, all ethnicities, all life experiences to just have a platform to share their experiences and building community with one another, which I think is really important.
Yeah, that is very important. Thank you for sharing that, Shira. So now getting into your book, I wanted to start with your first book, Beauty with a Twist. So that talks a little bit more about your journey, and can you tell us a little bit more about the book and what inspired you to write it? And if I'm not mistaken, I believe it was over quite a span of years that you were writing this book as well. So just any insight that you can share about your book.
Yeah, I spent about probably 10 years writing the book, and while writing, I didn't know that I would be writing it to be a book, at
Mhm.
least when I first started writing it. Of course, down the line, I was like, oh, this could be a book.
Yeah.
But when I started writing my story, it was really just like a process, almost like journaling.
Mhm.
It was very cathartic for me, and just being able to put all the words and emotions I had in my head and my heart and put it down on a piece of paper. And so I always tell people that when I wrote my book, it was very much a part of my healing process. It healed me writing this book. And so I think it will always have a special place in my heart because a lot of the stories and different accounts that I give in this book, I hadn't really shared with other people at all. And so it goes really into um, a lot of detail of my private life, of my family structure. A lot of people see now they see, this person who is successful, has these accolades. But I've come a long way. And even since writing this book, I published it in January 2020 during the middle of the pandemic. I'm like, oh my gosh. It seems so long ago, but I published it in 2020 and not knowing where it was going to go, who it's going to relate to, if people would even care. But I think I did it more so for me,
Mhm.
to validate and affirm my own story. I think so many times we look for other people to validate and affirm us, and for us to be inspired by other people. But sometimes we have to inspire ourselves first. And so this book inspired me, saying that if I can be brave enough to put my story out there, to be vulnerable among people, then maybe that will encourage someone else to be brave enough and vulnerable enough too. And in that vulnerability, it opened up the space where I was able to connect with other women with disabilities and them sharing their stories and their medical histories with me. And to me, that's impactful. I don't have to be a New York Times bestseller to have impact.
Yeah.
And so, this project is my baby, and I'm really glad to share it with you all.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like you were saying about vulnerability, I feel like once we choose to, it takes a lot of effort to be vulnerable and to put your story out there. But in different ways, once we become vulnerable, I feel like we start to find those people that are able to relate with us, and it kind of builds that community and it builds that like safe network. So I yeah, I appreciate you going out there and like putting yourself and your vulnerability out there. Because I know a lot of people relate to it. And then talking about your next book, the children's book, so that one was published this past November, right? Yeah,
Mhm.
congratulations on that. So what
Yeah.
inspired you to do a children's book after kind of writing a book more about your journey and now going into the children's book Different Like Me?
I've always loved children's book. I remember when I was a little girl and I would go into the library or the bookstore and see all of these beautifully illustrated books. And I was just like, gosh, I want to be able to do that. Like if I could draw, I would totally like have done all of it, but I didn't.
Yeah.
I always children's book to me are special because I think they tell stories, and I think kids, they not only need stories, it's good for imagination and creativity, but I think kids need to see themselves also represented in those stories. And we are in an era of inclusion that I like to say that we're seeing so many stories told about different types of children, Black children, brown children, children with disabilities, children who are neurodivergent, children of immigrants. You know, we hear so many different types of stories, which is important because there's so many different. When I think about kids in a classroom setting, there is one band-aid that fits us all. Every child comes from a different family, a different background, is dealing with something. And so when I decided to publish this book, Different Like Me, I actually had written it a couple of years ago, and it just has been sitting in
Mm,
my archive for a while. And then I was like, yeah, I probably should publish this now. I think it's been sitting on the shelf for a minute and dusted off. And I think it was also an answer to the little girl in me who was reading children's books, but not necessarily seeing her story told. And so the main character is based off my story as a little girl, but it's a little different. It's not as detailed as the,
mhm,
chapter book, but it's about a little girl who's different, and she doesn't have an ear, and how that makes her sad sometimes, and how she has to be in the hospital. And then she imagines what it's like to be a grown up, and all the amazing things that she would do, even when she's in the hospital. And so it's very dear to my heart too, just on another level, because I remember spending so much time in the hospital, and all I had was my imagination.
Mm.
And my imagination enabled me to not go to a lot of dark places because of pain, because of trauma. And so I love this book because it's super colorful, it's very imaginative, and I'll share like the 2 pages that really stick out to me that I absolutely love. And I think it just shows the power of imagination and resiliency, especially with children with chronic illnesses. Like, you may not be able to go out and play with the other kids, but you have imagination, you can draw, you can color, you can read, you can write stories, which is a lot of things that I did as a child because I physically could not do a lot of them other activities that other kids my age were doing. So that was definitely an outlet for me. And so I hope that other children are inspired, that whether they're in a hospital room or at home in the bed, that they too can write and write their own story.
No, definitely, definitely. Yeah, representation is so important. It's when we're not represented, it kind of feels like we're not a part of a community. And so for you to do that and for a children's book, right? Because children's are like they're the next generation, they're the foundation. Um, so yeah, that's amazing. I love that you did that. What I guess you said that you had written this a few years back. So, was this after you published Beauty with a Twist and you were like, "Let me just kinda dabble into, like, children's book as well?" Or was this, like, a running idea and at some point you just put it on paper? Because I know the previous book took quite like, that was kind of your journey and that took 10 years, and then I guess where did this come from?
Yeah, so it was definitely after Beauty with the Twist, and it was always like a running idea.
Mm,
And then last year I was like, I need to stop playing around with this idea and actually actualize it and bring it to fruition. And so that's what I did. But I'm a writer, and so I'm always writing something. The notes app on my phone is ridiculous. Like, I have probably like over 200, 300 plus notes from across the span of years of just me writing
mhm.
thoughts that come to my head, ideas, little short stories, poems, comments that I have, arguments and rebuttals,
Yeah.
that I just house in my notes app, and just it's a matter of timing. And so I thought last year would be, it just seemed like the right timing to release it,
Mhm.
and just take the momentum from last year and continue to build on that.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I'm like that too. I'll go back in my notes app and be like, "Oh, I wrote this?" Like,
Yeah.
"Good job." But, and is there a way that I guess the 2 stories are kind of linked together or connected?
Yeah, definitely. Even though it seems like the distance between them as far as years in which they are created, I think they kind of are different aspects of the same story. When I wrote my book, Beauty with a Twist, I definitely had older audiences in mind.
Mm,
And being a young woman, when I first started writing Beauty with a Twist, I was in I would say, coming out of my teens into my 20s, and so I was still pretty, I mean, I'm a young woman now, but I was younger, even younger
yeah.
at 20. And so I just had a lot of, I had a lot of feelings and emotions about processing my high school experience, middle school, a
Mm,
lot of the things I experienced that weren't always necessarily great. And like I said, the writing really helped me to process a lot of that. And I was thinking about another young girl who may be different or has a disability, who is going through high school, who
mm,
is going through middle school, and also having a difficult time, and wanting to let her know she is not alone. And a majority, those of you who've read it or who are going to read it, a majority of the book takes place when I'm in middle and high
mm,
school. Those formative years are so crucial to our developments and who will become as young adults, and adults who are in society and to the workplace, to our families. A lot of those our characteristics, our personalities are really structured in those middle and high school years. And so for me, those years were really difficult and just kind of providing a place to house and to process all of those emotions and difficulties. I kind of wanted to just give a blueprint for other young ladies that they didn't have to go down that dark road like I did. And when I
Mm,
say dark, I don't mean like nothing like bad happened. Well,
mm,
I mean, there were some things that were really unfortunate and some traumatic, but I think sometimes we think dark as it's like I did something like way out there, like, but
yeah.
sometimes life can get really dark, just like emotionally. You can go through a lot of depression, you can suffer from anxiety and things like that. And I really struggled with that in high school. And so and it was to the point that it got really dark emotionally and mentally that I think I went through a really long period of hopelessness, which is a dark place.
Mhm,
And so I wanted this book to kind of be like a blueprint and a guide to combat against hopelessness and to give people hope, which is why the book, the sub name is called Hope, Healing, and Restoration, because I wanted to give hope to other young women. Like, if I survived high school, you can too. And then different like me, it's more whimsical, it's more creative because I think after having gone through such a long journey of healing and a lot of darkness, I was able to tap into my inner child.
mm,
Those things that I loved doing when I was a child before I realized that I was different, before difference or my disability became a stigma. I wanted to get back to that little girl. And so when I was a little girl, I loved to dance. Like I walked around the house in a tutu for at least a good 2 years of me 8 and 9 years old. I loved to color and I loved to sing. And I did all of these things unapologetically because that's what children are supposed to do. And just that level of purity and freedom that I had in my identity and my disability before I knew what trauma was and what it felt like. I was experiencing that as a child. And so I wanted to bring that level of joy that I had back to the surface. And so for me, like I said, it's just different aspects of me, like the part of me that had to grow up more a little emotionally because I had to, and then a part of me that also wanted to stay in tune with that inner child, that playfulness, that like I said, that whimsy, that creativity that sometimes we lose because we can go through so much in life. And so I think I'm definitely now in a place that I'm like, there are activities and things that I love to do that I allow the world to take from me because they said disabled people can't do A, B, and C. But
mhm.
there was a time in my life where me being disabled didn't cross my mind and I thought I could do anything. And so I definitely am getting back to that place where I'm like, I'm disabled and I still can do these things that I imagined when I was a child. Like there's nothing stopping me.
Definitely. I feel like each book definitely spoke to the age group that it was meant to speak to, right? Like with the chapter book, it's about vulnerability and it's about talking about topics that, I mean, we have gotten to a point where I think we do talk more about like mental health and the importance of mental health, but there is still definitely a stigma around it, right? But once we start the conversation, then it's like, okay, this is normal. I'm not alone in this and it's okay to feel like this, and there is still hope. And then just the fact of the children's book speaking to like that whimsical side as you were talking about, but like whimsical side and seeing the representation at the same time, even if a child doesn't realize that they're like seeing someone like them. I mean, it's an internalized feeling, right? Once you start to see something that you're able to relate with, even if you're not fully understanding what you're fully seeing. So no, I love that you kinda did both of those books. Is there possibly are you thinking of maybe another book? Or
I don't have many books inside of me. It's just like a matter of timing. I am in process of writing another one, but I cannot say when.
I understand.
Because I learned the book writing process is not linear, and for me, when I write, I go through as I write.
Yeah.
And if I can make sense of that, like I don't write things just out of pure imagination, but I draw from my lived experience a lot. And so some of the things that I'm journaling and writing, I'm still going through them. And so that writing takes work. That type of writing, deep writing, it takes a lot of work. And so I feel like whenever God says you're done with this portion of this process, I'll release it.
Yeah.
So
Okay, okay. We will keep an eye out. Um, in the meantime, though, can we see both of the books, like both of their covers? And then if you want to share any part of the readings or the visuals.
this is my first book, Beauty with a Twist. It definitely has a school emblem on it because I have two versions. The
Mm,
school one, I just take out some content that I felt may have been a little too heavy
mm,
uh, for high school students or for adolescent students who may not be ready for that level of vulnerability, I will say. But it's still a pretty easy read, and I love it. And okay. And then Different Like Me. It's a little cute book. There's stocking stuffers. I because I released it close to the holiday, it was like a stocking stuffer, and these are just some pictures in the book. This is actually one of my favorite pictures because it's just like so
dreamy.
me. Yes, it's dreamy. It's so me, and every time I see it, it just makes me smile inside.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, those are the 2 books, and I think the covers and the colors are very much representative of who I am. And those who are close to me are definitely like, "Yeah, that's definitely you, Rasheera."
Oh, I love that. And if you're willing, would you be able to do a short book reading from the chapter book, possibly?
Yes, sure. So there's so many good sections in this book. So this part is from chapter 7. It's called Healing, and this section is called The Path of Healing. My process of healing didn't come overnight. It was a long journey. Matter of fact, I'm still walking this road. It is a daily process, but each year I get stronger and stronger, and the load gets lighter and lighter. When I began to embrace the path of healing in my life, I began to take steps that would lead me in the direction I needed to go. The first place I had to start was with me. I had to look in the mirror and face the demons of my past. The first thing I had to look at was how I looked at myself. I had low self-esteem and a broken self-image. I needed to find who I was outside of surgery, outside of being different, outside of being Black, outside of being disabled. I had to change the way I dress and who I associated with. And God began to place people in my life who were assured, confident, and strong. And it wasn't an easy process. Most of the time, I felt uncomfortable, but I stuck with it because I wanted to be free. Year by year, my confidence got stronger, and once I was able to stand on my own 2 feet, I then had to target the hidden areas of my thinking that were really toxic. I began to pinpoint broken places in my thinking, focus on how to rebuild my train of thought. I began to identify thinking patterns in my life which were connected to rejection, fear, and abandonment. I had to learn how to forgive and let go of my mother and father's mistakes so that I could be free emotionally and mentally. Prayer and worship have become a daily part of my regimen. In times where depression would come up and I felt defeated, I used prayer and worship as a weapon. Instead of spending my days hiding and my nights crying, I talked to God, and He became my best friend. I took all of my idle time and I began getting involved in church. This saved me because it kept me accountable and kept my mind from wandering and going into dark places. I also went to counseling. I talked to a professional and vented to someone who had experience and who could help me sort out my mixed emotions. These are all the steps I took to healing. Without these steps, I wouldn't be in the place where I am today, healthy and whole emotionally and mentally. And that's just the last chapter of that book.
Go
That
ahead.
one section just I'm like, "Man, I wrote that." And I was like, "There's so much more I could say on that." But again, you write, you learn, you grow, and just but at that time, that was what I needed to say and what needed to be written. So I don't know, maybe I need to do like a revised version.
No, I love that that's kind of the near the end of the book because there's so much growth that comes out of uncomfortable situations and like having to like face those uncomfortable situations and it's a journey, right? Like we all go on that journey and I feel like that's a very universal journey and it's something that's very relatable and the uncomfortableness that you have to go through is always so rewarding at the end when you see that growth.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, I thought that was a great note to kind of like close out kind of near the end of the book.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I am so glad that you took out the time to talk with us and let us learn a little bit about you and about the books. Is there anything else that you would like to share?
I would like to encourage, like, people ask me all the time, like, "How did you write a book? How did you do it?" And my advice, there is a scene, if any of you have seen the movie Sister Act, the second one,
Mm,
um, with
not-
Whoopi Goldberg,
Mhm,
cult classic. And she's talking to the girl Rita who has an attitude and doesn't want to be in a choir. And
mhm,
she's like, I don't understand, Rita, why you don't want to be in a choir when you obviously can sing.
mm,
And she's like, I read this book, and she was like, if you wake up every morning and all that you want to do is sing, then you're meant to be a singer.
mm,
And I like to take that same, if you wake up every morning and what you want to do is write, then you're a writer.
mm,
Having a degree, even being a published author, doesn't make you a writer.
mhm,
Putting words on a page makes you a writer.
mm,
And some of our words are meant to share with others, and then some are to keep for ourselves.
mm,
And so whether, like I said, I have so many notes apps and journals and things that I constantly write throughout my day, throughout my week. It's not something that I don't call myself a writer when I'm just making a book, but I write just because it's a part of my life journey. It's a
mm,
part of my healing journey. And so
mhm.
for those of you who say, I don't have the words to say it, I'm not like a writer or super smart, who cares? Your
Yeah,
story doesn't have to be perfect and your words don't have to be perfect. That's what a good editor is for. And so I encourage you that if you want to write, go ahead and write. There, don't let anything or anyone stop you for that matter.
that was beautiful. Thank you, Rashira. And Rashira, if anyone wants to continue to kind of like follow you on social media, and then I know you've already mentioned where your podcasts were, but also if they want to get your books, where can they get your books and then follow you as well?
Yeah, you can find my books on Amazon. That is the easiest, most accessible place you can buy them. Just type in the book title, Beauty with a Twist by Rasheera Dopson and Different Like Me by Rasheera Dopson, and they will both pop up. And then as far as you can follow me on social media, I am on Instagram, TikTok these days. And even Threads, which is a new app. I'm still trying to figure out how I feel about it. But Instagram and definitely TikTok. And for all my professional people, LinkedIn, of course. Um, but yeah, those are the places you can follow me and come follow me. I think I post really engaging content and you'll get a table full of stuff that I like to talk about. So yeah, thank you for having me on, Khadija. I really enjoyed speaking to your audiences.
Yeah, of course. We are so grateful to have you on. And hopefully we'll have you on again. But thank you so much for your time and thank you for sharing with us and sharing about yourself and your books. And we will check in with you on another time. All
All
right.
right. Bye.